Hello, my name is Skylar Earle, and I would like to talk to you today about crowdsourcing damage assessment after Hurricane Sandy. My story starts in August of 2012 at the relief exercises put on by the Naval Postgraduate School. The relief is a quarterly event held at Camp Roberts, which brings together participants from the military, from civilian government agencies, from the voluntary sector, and from the private sector to collaborate on experiments in disaster relief and humanitarian activities. In August, the Navy Postgraduate School, in a meeting organized by John Crowley, brought together representatives from the Federal Emergency Management Agency, which provides coordination between state, local, and federal actors in emergency situations in the United States, and representatives from the Civil Air Patrol, which is the civilian auxiliary to the United States Air Force. After most emergency situations in the United States, Civil Air Patrol will fly over the affected areas with digital SLR cameras and GPS receivers and capture geotagged images of the event. The meeting was intended to bring together FEMA and Civil Air Patrol to talk about how Civil Air Patrol's activities could best benefit FEMA. Our main takeaway from the meeting was that FEMA, by and large, lacks the manpower resources to do detailed analysis of the tens of thousands of photographs that Civil Air Patrol captures in these events. So Kate Chapman and I, from the Humanitarian OpenStreetMap team, adopted a piece of software originally built by the Public Laboratory for Open Technology and Science to make it possible for an unskilled volunteer to quickly look at an image and provide an assessment as to whether that image depicted little to no damage, moderate damage, or heavy damage. As you can see, there's a little magnifying glass to make it possible for a user to examine an area in detail, and then they make one of these selections and are immediately presented with another image. In this way, it is possible for a contributor to very quickly go through and provide an amateur assessment of the amount of damage depicted in each image. And it turns out that that assessment, while of course it's not a professional assessment, can be extremely valuable as a first pass, as a very kind of quick, off-the-cuff assessment of where the greatest damage has occurred in a disaster. Immediately after Hurricane Sandy, we were asked by FEMA to deploy the MapMill application for the images that were coming in from Civil Air Patrol as soon as they were able to get into the air. Within literally a matter of hours, we were able to begin building up a picture of where the greatest damage had occurred during and after the storm. As you can see, we were able to aggregate the judgments of the anonymous volunteers on the internet about geotagged photographs and then represent those in the U.S. national grid in a format that FEMA was then able to consume into their GIS and make judgments using the volunteer contributed kind of amateur damage assessment. As you can see, the system allows us also to drill down to the geotagged images that depict the areas with the greatest damage. For example, Breezy Point in New York City, which not only flooded during the hurricane, but then subsequently burnt down. Within the first week, we were able to ingest nearly 30,000 images from Civil Air Patrol. They captured, in fact, 150,000 images after the event, and so this image ingestion thing is a bottleneck that we're currently working to get through. But those images were viewed by over 6,000, we believe over 6,000 unique contributors with slightly under 6,000 unique IP addresses. What's interesting to note is that we promoted this activity purely via social media using Twitter and Facebook, and over half of those contributors were within the first 48 hours after the event. In total, they provided over 140,000 assessments within the first week, and again, half of those assessments were provided within the first 48 hours after the initial deployment of the system, which itself was within the first day after the disaster itself. And so in this way, we are able to provide FEMA with a very quick assessment, very quick, albeit rough, assessment of sort of where the greatest damage had occurred across the eastern seaboard of the United States. And FEMA, in fact, were kind enough to provide us with a couple of videos from administrators and managers thanking the volunteer community for the work that they had done providing these assessments because, in fact, FEMA was able to use the aggregated assessments of damage to help direct their emergency operations. It's interesting to note that we have this very classic looking long tail relationship between the number of images that were assessed by each user. A very large number of users assessed a very small number of images each, and a comparatively small number of users assessed a relatively large number of images each. What's interesting to note about this, which would otherwise be expected, is that the level of inter-annotator agreement, which we use as a way of assessing the relative consistency of the results, started out at about 60%, even for those users who came in off the internet, assessed one or two or a small number of images, and then disappeared. The level of inter-annotator agreement increased to over 75% for users who assessed a very large number of images, but a 60% agreement is regarded as extremely good, actually, for a crowdsourcing task. And our takeaway from this is that it's possible for even for a user who makes a very tiny contribution to still make a contribution which is valuable. Moreover, we found that at around 5 or 6 assessments per image, the inter-annotator agreement reaches almost 99%, meaning that we need only to have a relatively small number of users look at each image in order to come up with an assessment which is at least internally consistent. We are currently working on an after-action report which compares the amateur assessments to assessments made by volunteers from GIS Corps using the same system, and also with the professional ImageCat damage assessments provided by FEMA in order to ascertain to what extent the volunteer assessments were accurate and to attempt to determine in what ways we could improve either the MapMill system or the image gathering capabilities of Civil Air Patrol in order to amplify the quality of the results that are produced by the amateur crowd. But the main takeaway here is that the experiment worked. MapMill was, in our eyes and in the eyes of FEMA, an unqualified success in that we were able to provide to them at very little cost a rapid assessment, a very quickly assembled situational assessment that enabled FEMA to better deploy their resources and to better provide coordination to their partner agencies in the first 72 hours after the disaster. The MapMill platform itself is open source software. We are continuing to develop it, and we are hoping to bring on board other communities and other participants to continue developing the platform for future use. Thank you very much for your time.